Hi everyone, welcome to topic 6 of your Crash Course in R. Today we're going to talk about how to write reproducible code and where to share and host your code once it's written. First, what do I mean by reproducible? When I say reproducible, I mean that if you send your code to someone, including the data files if applicable, they can 100% reproduce your code without getting errors or divergent results. So the question is, how do we ensure that our code is reproducible? When you're writing code, there are a series of things you can do to increase the chances that your code will be 100% reproducible. One thing you can do is first make sure that you're using the most recent version of R. The reason that you should do this is because sometimes packages are or aren't compatible with different versions of R. You can check and download the most recent version of R on the CRAN website. Something that might happen is that you might actually need an older version of R. This might happen if you need to use a specific package or if you're trying to reproduce someone else's code that perhaps was published a couple of years ago. If you need this, you can go ahead and look at the older versions of R. And if you download these versions, so for example, we can go into R0 and we can actually download an earlier version of R. Now, one thing that you might be wondering is, how do I switch between using different types of R? And one thing you can do is use what's called R-switch if you're using a Mac. What R-switch allows you to do is easily switch between different versions of R. So if we go to this website, you'll get something like this, and essentially you can switch between using version 3.6 of R, for example, to 3.7. And all you do is you have this little icon at the top of your screen, and you can switch between the different R versions. This is super helpful if you just, like I said, need to write something with a certain version of R, but typically want to use the most recent version of R. The second thing you can do is always update your packages. There are two ways you can do this. If you just want to update a specific set of packages, you can use this update packages function. However, if you want to go ahead and update all of your packages, you can go to the Packages tab, click Update, click Select All, and then click Install Updates. And if you have a ton of packages to install, like I do, or to update rather, this is much faster. A third thing you can do if you're running analyses that have any sort of randomness in it, you can set a seed. Set seed ensures that when you are generating random numbers, that you are generating the same random numbers. Another thing you can do, in addition to setting seed, is actually save the output of your models. So rather than having someone go through your R script and running the models themselves, you can actually save the models directly. And the way that you do this is by including your object or model in this first argument of save RDS, and then including your file name and RDS in the second argument. And the way that you read in the object is by using this read RDS. So this can be helpful, like I said, if you want to make sure that everything is completely reproducible. For example, if set seed isn't working for some reason. Another reason you might do this is because your models take a really, really long time to load. So this can be helpful and reduces the burden of other people if you have a model that says that will require a couple hours to load, for example. Even if it's just a couple minutes, this can be really nice for the people who are looking through your code. A fifth thing that you can do is load and install your packages. So we discussed this in topic 1, but you shouldn't assume that anyone has the same packages that you do. So by using something like this, you can essentially require that when this line of code is run, not only will the package load, but it will also install the package if whoever is running your code doesn't already have it. This will prevent getting that error that says this package can't be found, which can just be a hassle for people if they're trying to run through your code. Finally, don't include paths when you load data. Instead, use working directories. Why? Well, your path won't work for other people. So if you write your code, and perhaps I do have a data set on my desktop called data.csv, this will load for me. However, it's very unlikely that other people also have something that's called here's K and Morehouse, and that within that there's a folder called desktop. So people aren't going to be able to run this line of code. So what you can do instead is set the working directory. And sometimes I genuinely write insert path here just to remind people that they need to insert their own path. And then you tell your audience that they need to set their path to the same place they've saved the data. If you do this, then you can actually load in your data set without including any paths. And this is really nice, again, for the reason that people's paths will be different. And so this ensures that there's not any finagling on the part of your audience and that they're able to load in the data successfully. Of course, this is contingent on the fact that you actually save the data. So remember, whenever you're saving R scripts, if you are loading in data that's not from the web, make sure that you're also sending them the data frame. So these are all conventions you can use to make sure that when you're writing code, you are providing the best chance that it can be reproducible. However, once you're done writing code, there are some other things that you should do to also ensure that your code is in fact reproducible. The first thing you should do is restart R. You can do this by clicking the session at the very top and clicking restart. The reason this is great is because it will clear the packages and give you a fresh workspace. The other thing you should do if restarting R doesn't clear your environment is to go ahead and clear your environment directly. You can do this by going in the Environment tab and clicking this through. Once you've cleared your environment, you can go ahead and rerun your code. This will tell you whether you forgot to add packages, datasets, or anything else. The reason this is the case is because once you've removed everything from your global environment, if you are now running code and getting an error that a dataset isn't found, that means that perhaps you loaded something via your console or didn't save it in this R script, and other people similarly won't be able to load that dataset. If possible, it's really great to also test your script on another machine. So if you have an old computer or a school computer or have a friend who is willing to test through your code, this is the best thing that you can do because this will be the closest test to what will be happening when people are actually downloading your code. Again, this will ensure that you didn't forget to add any packages, datasets, etc. Okay, so those are just some basic conventions about how to write reproducible code. But once you have this code, how do I share it? One option is using OSF. OSF is a free platform where you can host and share your research. In order to use OSF, you can create an account if you want to host your own work, or you can go ahead and search for papers or people specifically. So I can search for my lab mate and look at all of her projects. This can be helpful if you know that someone's done something similar and you want to use their code. So imagine now that you have a manuscript or a project and you want to upload something to OSF. What should be included? I've included one example here of an OSF I like from one of my former lab mates, Benedict Curdy, but I've also included here some specific things that you should include in your OSF. The first is just instructions for reproducing your results. So this is basically, can be a Word document, it can be a text file, but it's something that tells your audience how to reproduce your results. This can be really important if you have tons of R scripts because it tells them the order in which they should be run. This is especially true if there is data cleaning that needs to happen before running the analyses, etc. One thing that you should keep in mind is that if there are other pieces of information that need to be shared about your R script, this is a good place to do it. So for example, if you have an R script that will take 12 hours to run, it's probably wise to let people know this in your instructions for reproducing results because they can run this script overnight. You don't want to get into a situation where someone starts loading your code and then realizes their R is running for hours and hours. The second thing is both your data, obviously, and also a code book. One of the biggest things I've noticed when people are publishing their code is that they provide the data set, but they don't provide a code book. And this makes it really difficult for anyone looking at your code to actually know what you're doing. Everyone tends to use different conventions when naming variables, So it making sure that you've included a code book that has the variable name along with the levels and even the stem of the question if you want to go the extra mile. This makes your data and code a lot more intelligible. The third thing is a reproducible and host script. So this is your script that you've used to produce all of the numbers in your manuscript. Something that can be really helpful is actually structuring your analysis script in a similar way as your manuscript. So for example, you might have a header like I have here that says study one, and then a subheader that says participants, main analyses. And another thing that you can do is actually put your analyses in order that they appear in the paper. That way, if someone has both your manuscript pulled up and also your code, they can really clearly go through one by one. Now, you might be wondering if anyone's actually going to be doing this, and this doesn't always need to be external people. So, something that I do a lot is I actually send my OSF before I publish it to research assistants, and I have them go through my manuscript and my code, just like I've been saying, side by side. And this is helpful for two reasons. It first helps me spot places that my code doesn't replicate and also allows me to check all of the numbers in my manuscript. So this doesn't always, like I said, need to be something that's for other people, but it can be a really useful tool so you can yourself spot errors before publishing your manuscript. The fourth thing that I mentioned earlier is saving your models. So if you have a lot of randomness in your model, so for example, if you're running a Bayesian GLM and you're getting slightly different results every time, even if it's just 0.1 decimal points. If you save your model, you can actually ensure that people can load in exactly the model you use to write your manuscript. So this can go in your OSF. I like to keep these in their own separate folder, just so my OSF is a little cleaner. And finally, you can actually include your stimuli. So this is helpful if someone in a couple of years wants to replicate your results or something. You can actually just send them the OSF and they can have the stimuli directly for your study. Two people that I think do a really great job of making their OSFs really intelligible and reproducible are two of my lab mates, Tess Charlesworth and Benedict Curdy. So if you do want to look at examples, I would point you in their direction. Beyond the functionality I've talked about so far, there are a couple other reasons that you might use OSF. One is that you can actually pre-register your studies directly through OSF. Note that OSF is a little bit more involved than using as predicted, for example, so this will certainly be a longer process if you decide to pre-register via OSF, but you can certainly do this. Another reason is because you can actually link your work to conferences, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and look at SPSP 2021 convention. And here I can see that all of these people have uploaded their posters or talks. And this is great because it allows people, if they have just seen your talk, for example, of course, this is before everything is virtual and there are already online copies, but you might remember someone's talk and go look for it in something like this. So having an OSF account is also increasing the visibility of your work. Finally, it makes data conservation a lot easier. If someone asks you in a couple of years to get your data for a meta-analysis, and you've completed that project 8 years ago, you can just send them an OSF link. This reduces the need to dig out that old computer and find that data set that you haven't thought about in years. All right, so that is the basics of OSF. Just to recap, it's essentially a place to store your data, and also it can be a great resource for finding code. So like I said, let's say that you've just read Benedict's paper. You can actually go to the OSF associated with this paper and look at the way that they've written their analysis. So say that you see that they've done this cool variance decomposition analysis and you want to know how they did it. Using OSF is a great way to find those analyses and use as a baseline for your own work. All right, so now that we've talked about OSF, I want to give you another option. I don't think that GitHub is necessarily an alternative to OSF, but it is another type of open source code repository platform. If you're not familiar with GitHub, I've included some helpful links about how to create an account, how to download it for your desktop. I've also included some information about tutorials that were created directly from GitHub. So this is definitely something that's worth looking at later if you are really interested in going in more detail, because GitHub can be a bit of a bear. But I want to go through the basic GitHub workflow. So to back up a little bit, unlike OSF, which is something that you use more to publicize your work and also host completed projects, GitHub can be thought of almost as a Google Drive. It allows you to work collaboratively. So this will make more sense in a second, but I want to quickly talk about how GitHub works before we actually set it up on our machines. So the idea of GitHub is that it allows you to work collaboratively on projects. So in addition to being like OSF in that you can actually post your code, you can edit code alongside others. So the way this works is similar to Google Drive. Google Drive has a version on their server in the same way that GitHub has kind of a master version of the document. And in order to edit something from GitHub, you essentially pull the R script from GitHub. This is like refreshing a page. It ensures that you're getting the most recent code. So after you've pulled the code from GitHub or pulled the R script, you can write code like you normally do. The difference is once you're done, you can go ahead and push your code back to GitHub. And this is just like saving your edits so that someone can pull the most recent code later. Now, like I said, this might not make any sense now, but let's go through first setting up your GitHub, and then we'll go through this again. So the way that you need to sync your GitHub and R server is as follows. You first need to allow Git in RStudio and create a secure key. So we can do this by going to Tools, Global Options, and then Git/SVN. Once you have this, you can click Enable Version Interface for RStudio projects, and then click Create RSA Key. So I've already created one, but I'll go ahead and click it again. You don't need to add a passphrase, but you can click Create. And then what you'll do is you'll click this View Public Key and copy this value. Okay, so once we've done these 3 steps, you need to add this public key to your GitHub. So in order to do this, you'll first go to GitHub. Then you will click on your icon, go to Settings. On the left, you'll go to SSH and GPG keys. Then you'll click Add and paste in your key. So once we do this, we can go ahead and sync our GitHub repo and our RStudio project repo. We have to go back to GitHub, and let's choose a project. We'll choose a new package I'm working on. We will click Code, and we'll go ahead and click Use SSH and copy this URL. Now we'll go back to RStudio. We'll click File, New Project, Version Control, Git, and we'll paste in our repository URL. And if you want to give it a specific home, you can assign it to a subdirectory So let's create this project. Okay, so now what we'll see is we are in a new project called WiP test. So this is just a test that we're doing now. You can name it whatever you want. And we'll see that we have these new options. So we have this git here, we also have git here. And when I said push and pull, I'm talking about this here. So first, what we'll always do whenever we start programming is we'll pull. This is, again, like I said, we're refreshing the page to ensure that we have the most recent version of the code. Now let's go ahead and just create a new R script. This, you can save this. And now this test R appeared in this Git folder. So now what we can do is we'll click it, we'll commit it, and when we say we're committing it, essentially what we're doing is we're pushing this to the master file. So we'll say test commit. And once we do this, we no longer see our test file here because it doesn't need to be updated anymore. Once we do this, we'll go ahead and push the changes to GitHub. Great. Okay, so now if we go ahead and pull again, you can see that we're up to date. And if I were to go to my code for this project, I would now see that I have this new test.r. If I click this, I can see that I have exactly what I've coded. And if I click directly on this test commit, I can actually see exactly what changes were made. So this is helpful if you want to look at what changes your peers have made when they're editing your code, and perhaps it's not totally clear when you're looking at the code. So again, we'll do this one more time. Go ahead and pull, write some code, commit, and see what happens here is that our test document is not here. This is because we haven't saved our document. So once we save it, we now see that we have the test.r here. So we'll go ahead and click this, press commit, second commit our document. We now see that we've have one file changed, which is exactly what we've done. We're now going to push this to GitHub. Great. Once we pull this, you see that everything is up to date. And if we go check out our GitHub, refresh this, we now see that our second commit appears. And if you want to look at all of your changes, right here, there's a little clock. And if you click the 3 commits, you can see all of the different commits. So something that I should mention is because I'm using a project that already exists, I didn't talk about this README. But when you initially create a repository in GitHub, you'll want to make sure you include this README file so that everything's working properly. But we can actually practice making a repository like this. Go ahead and click the plus sign in the top right, click New Repository. Go ahead and give your repository a name. And then we can click Add README file. Once you've done this, you can also change some of the settings. If you want to make your repository private, you can. You can also choose a license if you want to make sure that other people know how they can or can't use your code. So once we have all of our settings completed, we can click Create Repository. And now we have our initial commit, which is always helpful to do because it helps ensure that we don't have any wonky initial commits. And once you have this new project, you can go through all the steps we just completed. Going to code, clicking the SSS key, and copying the key. And as you remember, what we did afterwards is we just created a new project and pasted that key into our Git repository, and then everything is able to link. Okay, so that was a very, very brief overview of GitHub. Like I said, I've included a bunch of different materials here if you want more detailed tutorials. But what I've just shown you is basically the conventions of GitHub. So the workflow, how it works in terms of pushing and pulling, how to sync your GitHub and our studio server, and also how to sync GitHub with your specific project. So when I say GitHub repo, that's what I have here. It's where all of the code is living for this specific repository, which can be thought of similar to a project in OSF. So in the same way that this is a repository, Benedict's paper here can be considered a repository for all of this code. So in sum, we've talked about how to write reproducible code, the conventions that you can use when writing code, and also how to test your code in order to make sure that it is in fact reproducible. We've talked about the benefits of using OSF. I've, like I said, linked to a couple of examples here. We've talked about what to include on your OSF page. And finally, we've done a little primer into GitHub. So with that, I will leave you with these materials, and I hope that they